Hi there. I thought it was about time to do another video. Although, as is often the case, I don't always have something to talk about, which is part of the reason why I don't do very frequent videos. Well, anyhow, today will be a little bit of a hodgepodge. It'll be a few bits and pieces about my thoughts on photography over the past, few weeks, few months. The last video I posted was actually recorded over 2 months before I finally got around to editing it and making something of it. And it still wasn't much. So this time around, I just want to talk about, basically where I am right now and where my photography is headed right now. As you may have known, if you followed any of my videos, I have been making an effort to minimize. Not to go super minimal. I'm not going to sell everything and buy a Fujifilm X100V. No, not that simplified. I still have too many cameras, but I've come to the conclusion that I'm not going to try and sell anything anymore. Just like I'm not going to be buying anything anymore unless it is a lens. And basically that's all I've been buying in recent times, lenses. I now have a nice set of primes for my Olympus system. I bought the 17 1.8. I already had a Lumix 25 1.7, and I bought the 45 1.8. So that sort of sits in a bag now with my EM5 Mark II, and it is a very, very nice, sharp, easy to use, quiet system that can be used for anything from street photography to shooting in a theater. My two EM1s, one of which sits in a bag with a battery grip on it, and in that bag is the only quality long lens I own. It's an old 4/3 50 to 200 f 2.8 to 3.5. I'm using a Lumix adapter to adapt it to the micro 4/3 mount, and I also have a 1.4 times teleconverter to go with it. This is a learning curve for me. I'm really not very proficient with long lenses. In fact, I also have the 75 to 300, the consumer grade, quite slow zoom. But because of its small size, I find it much handier to use. And even though the image quality is not as good, it's usually good enough. A little bit of post-processing, everything's fine. My other EM1, the one that I showed earlier that a friend of mine calls Frankenstein because the skin is missing, that is relegated now almost entirely to video use, and that is what's shooting this video right now. No, the video quality is not first rate, but I am not a cinematographer. I am not a high-end content creator. I am not an influencer. I'm just a guy who shoots YouTube videos in his basement. So this is quite adequate for the job. I use I believe I've shown this in a previous video. I am using a little mirror device, a very inexpensive device. I think it was less than $20. That goes on the top of my camera. I tilt up the screen at the back, and I can see myself perfectly. And unlike the flip-out screen on the EM5, nothing is in the way. No wires, no cables, no plugs. So this is an ideal situation for me. Anyhow, what was the point of this particular video? Not much, really. I am pretty much done with my little excursion into Sony. I do have an A6000, which I am holding on to, And I do have some very nice prime lenses, a Viltrox 13mm 1.4, a Sigma 30mm 1.4, and a Sony 50mm 1.8. Along with the two kit zooms, the 16 to 50 and the 55 to 210, I think it is. Along with those, that is it. I really haven't come to terms with the Sony to the point where I enjoy using it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the image quality, but it's just not an enjoyable experience. If I had one of the full-frame models with a different user interface, I may feel differently. But I have all APS-C lenses, so the idea of going to a full-frame Sony body is totally out of the question. So, back to my primary kit. I ended up keeping the EP3. I have an EP3. Permanently attached to it now is the old 17mm f2.8, and on the top of it is the worst electronic viewfinder that Olympus ever made, the VF3. But it allows me to frame in poor light. It allows me to put the angle at the camera at a lower angle because it tilts. And I am very happy with those 12 megapixel images from the EP3. The EP3 gives me the quality that I'm quite happy with. Now, how do I feel about all these new cameras with 50, 60 megapixels, 40 megapixel APS-C cameras, and so on? Well, the fact is this. Behind me, that screen behind me is attached to a 2012 Mac Mini. That Mac Mini has been upgraded to 16 gigs of RAM and a 500 gigabyte SSD. So it's quite capable, but it does not like big files, and it does not have the capability with its old Core i5 processor to use the latest and greatest software. My other computers are an equally old 2012 MacBook Pro, which is similarly spec'd. It's got a smaller SSD in it, but again, it's not capable of handling the newest software. And my Windows machine now, since Old Faithful blew up the rather large gaming computer my son had made over 10 years ago, finally kicked the bucket. I think it's only the power supply, but I don't think I'm going to bother. So my other computer, my PC, is basically now a Microsoft Surface. Again, an older model. Again, not capable of handling the latest and greatest software. So I'm using Affinity Photo 2. And on my Windows machines, I do have another old laptop that stutters along and is used just to hook up to my big hard drive in order to store my images. All these machines, I still have, on the PCs, I still have the old Picasa program, because I find that for simply importing images and putting them in nice, neat little folders based on date, it is the simplest piece of software that does not require any form of subscription. I am not into subscriptions. I think subscriptions are mainly, in many cases, they are more a money grab than anything else. Now, don't get me wrong, if I were a professional photographer, I would most definitely have an Adobe subscription. I would most definitely be using the Adobe software. I would probably also be using the Topaz AI software. But as a rank amateur, as someone who has just been playing with photography for the last 45 years, I guess, for somebody in that position, well, what I have now is quite adequate. So do I want the 60 megapixel camera? No. I'm quite happy with my 16 and 24 megapixel cameras. I don't even have a Micro Four Thirds camera with a 20 megapixel sensor. I haven't even gotten one of those yet. So my gear is quite old. My only high resolution is a 24 megapixel Sony a6000. Again, a relative antique. But I'm quite happy with it. Well, guys, that's enough of a, I guess you call it an anti-rant. I'm not saying anything against anything. I'm merely saying with the realities of my life and the realities of the gear that I have available to me, and with the financial roadblocks to upgrading, because as I said, if I upgrade to a higher resolution camera, then I probably have to upgrade all my computer gear as well, and then things get very costly. So I'm happy with what I have. And as for Micro Four Thirds, my fingers are crossed that it will survive. I don't understand the mentality that says that everybody has to have a full frame camera. Full frame has its place, but for most of us, it's definitely overkill. Well, guys, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you want to see more of my videos, subscribe. And if you think anybody's going to get anything of any use at all from this particular video or any of my others, by all means share them. Bye for now.